Hey, everybody, this is Jeff, and welcome to Let's Talk About It. We have an interesting guest tonight, and his name is Gabriel Nadales. He's written a book, been involved in a lot of things. Uh, he used to belong to a group called Antifa. Many of you know who that is. And he left, and well, we're going to talk about all of that tonight. So, without further ado, let me just go ahead and bring him in. Uh, how you doing, Gabriel?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I want to thank you for taking a moment of your time to come join us and be a part of what we're talking about. I remember seeing you first. I think it was CPAC 2020, if I remember right. And I was like, okay, this guy left Antifa, and now he's somehow doing all this TV stuff and has a little notoriety and whatnot. And let me dig into who he is. And so I started doing little cursory evaluation of who you were and your internet presence probably a year ago. And I had stopped doing all this stuff. This is kind of new. I'm jumping back into the podcast stuff. But anyway, I wanted to talk with you because I think, and particularly having read your book now, a lot of us have a lot of misconceptions about Antifa and whatnot. But before we do all of that, because you've done this now for at least 4 years that I know of, interviewing and lecturing and talking all over the place, I kind of want to ask just a simple question: is who is Gabriel Nadales today? Because you've been transforming for many years now. Who are you today? How would you describe yourself today?
I'm a dad, which is exciting.
Hey,
Uh, my
welcome
son
to the
is.
club.
Thank you. Um, yeah, I've been married for almost 10 years. I met my wife 10 years ago, and we got married 8 years ago. So I've been waiting for a little baby for like a while now. But I'm really excited that he finally came, and I think that it's weird. He actually had surgery a month ago, which was super scary.
Oh,
I don't want to bore like people with the details and stuff, but he had like something that's semi-common. It's called polaric stenosis, I think it's called. Basically, there was a muscle in his intestine that was inflamed, and it didn't let the milk pass and stuff. So it's super easy fix, but it's scary. And I'll tell you this,
sure.
you know, um, I was fine because the doctors were telling me like this is normal. Like, we see this. It's actually one of the best surgeries that could be done. All these things. And I was like, okay, okay. But it was scary. Like that moment when we were wheeling him over to the operation room, and I just oh my gosh, like it hit me and stuff. And I talked to my dad about it and stuff. I didn't tell him because it was like kind of like an overnight thing. Like I had to take him to emergency. Making all these things. And I remember I talked to my dad the next day on the phone. Um, and he told me something like, "Now you see," it's like, it's like yeah, like it's a weird feeling, like it's really really immense feeling of like fear of like oh my gosh, like my little son, but no, he's doing well. He is
Good.
2 months old, and like I think that I've never thought about doing things for myself. I've always wanted to do things for other people, but it's definitely a realignment of like now I'm working and trying to do things for one specific person, and I think it's I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of who I am now. Like everything that I do, I think back and I'm like, is this but am I being the person that my son is going to be proud of one day? Am I being the person who he looks up to? Because after all, like, if I'm a role model, like he's going to try to want, or ideally he's going to want to be like me. So I'm trying to be the best person I possibly can so he can follow in my footsteps. And I know there's going to be a lot of like faults. I'm going to do bad things here and there, all these things, but that's who I am now. I'm trying to be a
You,
good
you
role
know,
model
you
for my son.
you sound like so many of us when we had our first child. So trust me, I understand. And yeah, I'm having an operation. A month after your I mean, that would terrify me as well
Yeah.
because you go through the emotion of the 9 months, and then you realize this child, and then you're faced with this daunting thing about it. I can imagine, and I can imagine what that's like.
Yeah.
So now, as I read your book, what is it? Behind the
Behind the black mask.
yes. When I read your book, I'm going. It was almost like you were growing through a lot of things, and you had a lot of influences, and you're on the other side of all of that now. You're a father, which is definitely going to make a difference. It's going to change everything. You and your wife are, you have something much bigger than just about everything. So, and this is the point where really everything does kind of change, kind of settles down. Like you said, I want to be a role model. I want to make the right decision. I'm happy to know that you have a job because I know how that's going to affect you. I raised four and I've got grandkids. So you started out as a young man, a young kid in Mexico, and I read all the different stories about your family, different places and whatnot. You all ended up in America. You kind of made your way. Your dad's always been there. You just spoke of him. And then you ended up in Antifa. I mean, can you? And I wanted you to kind of jump in wherever you wanted to jump in about all of that. Can you kind of walk me through your personal journey to get to that place?
Sure. I mean, it's crazy to me because I've been thinking about this for a couple of days now. I've been an activist for 18 years, and I'm 30 years old. Finally made that 30. But I've been an activist since I was 12 years old, when I was in sixth grade. And I remember that the first time I was politically active was when there was an immigration bill back in 05, 06, which would criminalize illegal border crossings. Now, obviously, it's a criminal act, like to cross the border illegally, but it's more of a civil penalty as opposed to a criminal penalty. You just kind of get kicked out and you're not allowed back in, as opposed to being in jail. And I remember at the time, it was always portrayed as this idea of like, this is a racist law. This is going to go against all immigrants, all these things. And I thought to myself, like, well, like, how are they going, being an immigrant myself, like, I was like, well, why do these people like not like me? Like, I mean, like, they don't know me. And that's when I started kind of being politically active. It was, I mean, how active can I really be like at 12 years old, but I was doing a lot, as much as I possibly could. There was protests that I would attend around my school. There would be marches. I pass out flyers, do all these different things. I did that for a couple of years until I started feeling a little bit of kind of like anger that I was doing so much. Not anger. I don't think it was anger. It was more of like exhaustion. Like, because when you're an activist, there's such a thing as activist fatigue, because you get tired of marching, you get tired of passing flyers because no one seems to listen and no one seems to care. So after years of doing all these different things, I was like, man, I'm freaking tired. Like,
Well,
what
you
the
were
hell?
also, if I can jump in here, you were also just a child. I mean,
Yeah, I
16,
how much
14-year-old
again?
kid.
You're right. How much change can I really make? And now there are children out there who have made amazing strides, but at the same time, putting it in that context, yeah, I'm a child. I can't really do too much to do about anything. But when you're a kid, you don't really think about it in those terms. You're just like, why isn't it what I'm doing working? So I decided I needed to kind of level up my activism and kind of like, get a little more radical. I the Now, before I talk a little bit about Antifa, I think it's worth noting what Antifa is and what it's not. The
Well,
best way.
before you even go there, I kind of want to back up a moment because you
Sure.
said something. You're in Mexico, and you're. If I understood you right, the whole concept of people coming across the border, it was clouded in racism in your mind. Was that what angered you? Because in my
No,
mind, coming across the border illegally is a criminal act. And, they're not. It's gotten really bad. I got it's a tender subject, so I want to be careful with what I say. But were you in Mexico wondering why is there such a problem with us coming over? Meaning, your citizenry coming across in America. I mean, what triggered you in that regard?
oh, sure. I mean, I remember specifically a lot of the reporting of like Jorge Ramos, which is this guy from Univision. He would always be talking about this, and like I remember there was a big thing that they were encouraging, like a boycott. So which is something that we participated on. You know, like all Hispanics, like all immigrants were supposed to not buy groceries like on a specific day to show the effect of that immigrants have like on the American economy and stuff. Like those were like kind of the little tidbits of like me being politically active, and a lot of the reporting was always credited on like, you know, these racist like Republicans, these racist people who don't hate immigrants. You know, the reason they have these laws isn't because they were concerned about like immigration or illegal immigration per se. It's just because they hate immigrants. That's kind of like the way it was portrayed to me by some of these outlets and stuff. Like it was not something that I personally witnessed and stuff, but it is something that was in my mind through other people.
Because of what you were being told.
Yes.
Okay. So now let's skip back up to where you were. You said before I get into Antifa, what were you going to say?
So the best way to understand Antifa is not as an organization, because a lot of people call it an organization or a group, and it's not. The best way to understand Antifa is to see it as a movement. And within that movement, you have several different groups and individuals who are all trying to affect what is like an anti-fascist campaign. Now, a lot of these people could be independent, as I mentioned. They could just be one person, one anything, not affiliated with anybody, the lone wolf, if you want to call them that. Or they could be independent organizations that sometimes use the Antifa moniker, sometimes they do not. You know, there are many, many names that they use. Now, so when I went over to the first thing that I did with Antifa, I had read a little bit of history of Antifa at the time. You know, you're supposed to wear all black, you know, all these things. And I remember that there was an anti-Nazi protest in Claremont, California in 2011. And these were actual neo-Nazis, the National Socialist Movement. You know, they were swastikas and all these things. And I remember seeing this and I was like, what the hell? Like, I need to do something about this. You know, I call myself an activist. I'm doing all these things and I'm not going to go oppose Nazis. Like, oh, I'm going to go. So I go there dressed in black, you know, trying to figure out what to do about this.
At what age, if I can just, what age were you?
This is 2011, so must have been 20. Must have been 17. So yeah.
Okay.
5 years into my activism. So I go there and I'm dressed in black. I go to this park because there was this like event on Facebook, I believe, that I attended, and I felt like I was the only person dressed in black. There was a lot of people like, you know, racism, bad, all these different things, but I was like, okay, well, I'm dressed in black, my face is covered, all these things. And then there was this anarchist who came up to me and he asked me, you know, who I was, what it was about, and he. He asked me if I wanted to join him and his friends to oppose the Nazis head on. And, you know, he said something along the lines of, you know, just like wait for the call and like, we're going to go and like, we're going to go where the Nazis are. So, yeah, I waited for a few minutes and then he made like on a megaphone, he made a call and then we all just started walking. There must have been about 20 of us at this point of like Antifa, like people and stuff. Some people were carrying flags. Some people were carrying, what's it called? Some woman was wearing like a black and a red flag, which I recognized as being an anarcho-collectivist flag, which I thought was like it was interesting because I had read about all these anarchist theories about Antifa, all these things, but that was like the first time that I was plugged into the movement. And you know, that's kind of how it all started. I made friends there, and that specific chapter I should mention, they didn't use the Antifa moniker. They used the Antifa. They used the name DAC, which is, if I remember correctly, it was Direct Action Claremont, and it was a local Antifa like collective and stuff. You know, that
where were you living at this time? Were you in California?
Yeah, this is all in Southern California, in Los Angeles County. Claremont, California was the city. I used to live in Azusa, California. And then I used to be linked up with, what's it called? People who, you know, just like local anarchists who were in the area. That's kind of how I got plugged in. They invited me to do a lot of different things. I went to a lot of those different things. You know, that's kind of how it worked. And yeah,
I'm kind of curious about something because I'm sitting here thinking, okay, and I'm a straight shooter. Here's a kid who comes to our country, joins a movement, and begins to do what for what reason? I mean, Had you known much about America other than what you were taught and what you were influenced by? Because now you're out protesting and doing all these things, and you're 17 years old. You're basically 7 years down the road from when you got here, and you're still a teenager. You're growing up. How is it that you were that excited about being involved in a movement in a new country that you really hadn't grown up in? I'm just kind of curious. I'm trying to put this
Sure.
together.
I mean, I I've always wanted to do things. I've always wanted to like make a difference. Like this is, I feel like this is something that really goes into like who I am as a person. Um, as I mentioned, I've never wanted to live my life for myself. I've always wanted to help people. Now, it's funny to think about it in the terms of like, oh, joining Antifa helps people, but to understand that, you really have to learn, see it from the mind of like a really young activist, like the heart of a young activist who is like not really sure about things what they're doing, which can be dangerous. It definitely can be dangerous. Because I didn't really know what the hell I was doing and what the hell I was talking about. I feel like I have a better sense of it now, but at the same time, like at the time, I just wanted to make a difference, and I was being reckless about it. There's not much more than that. And
But,
as far
but
as like the things, sure,
But make a difference for who?
make a difference to make my community a better place. For
You're
example,
17
we go.
years old. You're 17 years old and you're living in California. You've immigrated to the States. I mean, what did you really know about America?
No, and I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you. But at the
Okay,
time,
so
you kind of have to see it from like the perspective of a 17-year-old kid. If I'll give you specific examples. When the immigration thing, I saw that in my mind at the time that it was an injustice against immigrant people, not just legal immigrants, but all immigrants. So what do? You raise awareness, you attend protests, you try to say like, no, this is wrong. Okay. When
okay.
they talk another protest that I remember my in 2009 when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor of California, there was a big thing on the media and the teachers unions made a huge deal about it when he was cutting the education budget. Now I had no idea what the hell like Schwarzenegger wanted. I don't know why he wanted to do that, but I do remember that there was a meeting in my I think it was like 2009 or something where they wanted to cut the music department. And they sent out a bunch of flyers. Like the teachers were like, "Oh, they're going to cut the education or like the music budget." Well, I attended. Why? Because I think that music programs are important, and I think that it was going to hurt a lot of people. So I went to the what's it called, the Board of Education meeting. That's one of the things that I did. Another example was in 2009 specifically. My favorite English teacher, she was about to get fired. So what did I do? Well, I went to the protest that the teacher union organized. All of these different things. I mean, when we're talking about, I try to give a general sense of like, giving a difference, making a difference, making community a better place, but you have to really be specific about how I'm going to making a difference in those specific places. Another thing I can tell you that I was very displeased with, the fact that America was involved in foreign wars, the Iraq war, the Afghanistan war, which fortunately we're not involved in anymore, which it's a whole different conversation. But I remember one of the things that I used to do is pass out a lot of anti-war flyers around my school, around my community, again, to raise awareness. Like how did I want to make a difference? Well, I want to make sure that my teacher didn't get fired. I wanted to make sure that what's called my the education budget wasn't cut. That the wars overseas were like not done with. That immigrants were not subjected to prejudice that I believe that existed at the time. Now, again, we have to, looking back, it's easy to see, well, like this kid doesn't know what he's talking about. And yeah, there's a lot of that. But from the lens of a 12-year-old kid, it makes perfect sense.
Well, I let me just say it this way: I didn't know any 12-year-old kids who had that much passion about stuff. We were just more interested in playing basketball. So, on that note, this has always been. It sounds to me like you've always been um, interested in a lot of things, but particularly injustice.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good way of putting it. I've always been very like, it gives me an ick and like whenever I see an injustice, I'm like, why isn't anybody doing something about it? And like I need to be the one who does something about it then. Now, I obviously that's changed, and there's things I wouldn't have done, and hindsight is 2020 as always. But I'm always trying to make sure that I do something whenever I see an injustice.
So then why not go to any country anywhere in the world where there's injustice and protest there? For example, in the Soviet Union, or what we call Russia, or in China, or
Well, I
in
will tell
North
you this.
Korea.
I will tell you this. I didn't choose to come to America. My parents brought me, and that's what was around me. I
I
will tell you
understand.
this: there's a lot of anarchists and a lot of Antifa activists who actually do go to other countries. Particularly, there's this gentleman. I'm forgetting his name right now. Oh gosh! But he wrote a book called "The Black Bloc Anarchist," and I helped him write it. And he would go in the mid 2000s. I didn't help him write it. Sorry, I helped him publish it. I should be more specific. In the mid 2000s, he would go to Venezuela and to try to like do activism there. Similarly, how there is American anarchists who are in Europe right now, in like Latin America, trying to do that. There are people who try to fight injustice around the country. Now we can see, we can have a conversation whether they should be doing that or not. Maybe like there's people who are uh, uh, maybe they should be concerned with their own country, but at the same time, like I came to America and I was here, I saw injustice around me. Now I didn't really have a global mind of like me wanting to do things abroad. I was just trying to do things in my community specifically.
Okay, so your birthplace was Mexico. I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot of injustice down there. Why not go back to Mexico and fight that? I'm just kind of, I'm asking questions that people would ask.
Sure.
Okay, and I'm
Sure.
not
Sure.
trying to put you on the spot. I'm one of these Americans who, and in your book, you made some. I loved how you spoke about America eventually, and what it all represents. But I'm sitting there going, geez, if you're from Mexico, go back to Mexico and fight
I'll tell you
injustice
what.
down there.
Well, what's it called? I may have been born in Mexico, but I'm an American. I became an American citizen about 2 months ago, and I will tell you this much: like,
Congratulations.
thank you. Like, I am first and foremost. Matter of fact, I still have my American flags right there. The one they gave you. You can't see it on camera and screen and stuff. It's
I
it's
got it.
it's it's right there and stuff. My American flag for that I got in my naturalization ceremony. Um, People, you know, I keep hearing this trend of like just go back to your country and make it better there. I'm like, that's a red herring, like why, like if there's an injustice here, this is my community, this is my new community, this is my new home. I want to make my own new home better. It's kind of a cop out just to tell immigrants like go back to your country and make it better. I'm like, well, I'm not really there anymore. That's not my home anymore. This is my new home.
Well, you're talking to a Black American who embraced his country. I'm not from Africa. I don't know a thing about Africa. I embrace this nation as my country. My root is American. My heritage is American, and everything that I have that I benefited from is American. So I love my country. I'm sorry to see what's happening in our country, but part of the reason I do all of this is because this country has always been amazing. It offered freedom to the whole world, and there's a whole kind of conversation we can have about all of those things. But at some point, you have to pick your battles, and it sounds like you were kind of all over the place. How is that any different today?
You know, I don't feel like I am all over the place. One of the things that I
Okay, good.
think is I've been very focused on in the last like several years is that of the idea of free speech and fighting extremism. I think that free speech is the antidote to extremism.
Elaborate.
It,
I'd
sure.
really love to hear this because you mentioned a lot of that in the book, and I'm seeing a transformation in how you processed all of this. Because when we shut down free speech, we don't have any freedom. It's just gone. So elaborate on that, would you please?
Sure. I think that Daryl Davis put it best, and I'm paraphrasing, and he said something along the lines of, if you're not talking, when the conversation stops, that's when you start fighting. When you're talking, you're just talking. Even if you're shouting, sometimes it can be very heated, but you're talking. As soon as the conversation stops, that's when action begins, and that could be very bad because a lot of people are unwilling to talk to the other side. They just want to, talk to people who agree with them, and if they don't want to agree with you, well then you want to do something about it, whether it be violent action, whether it be lawful fair, or other types of coercive means. I think that if you really want to make a country better, you have to foster an environment where people feel comfortable expressing themselves and that they will be heard. More importantly than having people's ability to speak, which is incredibly important, is making sure that people have the ability to be heard.
Well, let me ask you a question. How much dialogue do you have with Antifa folks today?
Not much, not at all.
And why is that? And the reason I'm asking you this is because if what you're saying is true, what I find when I'm talking to people, Professor Skip Moen said, "Why in the world would I want to sit and lecture in a room full of people that agree with every word coming out of my mouth? I'm not going to learn anything." So, in my experience, in particular in the Black community, it's very hard to talk to someone who's emotionally connected to the conversation and doesn't really have any facts or anything to support the conversation other than an emotional rant or rage. How do you get past that? And the reason why I ask you that is because the door isn't open for you to do that with Antifa, is it? Am I correct in saying that?
To an extent, it used to be. I just haven't been doing this as long as I haven't been doing this in a while, I should say. I used to do a lot of events on college campuses. I used to speak at, I've spoken at well over 100 colleges, and
Right.
Antifa would show up to several different, several of them. The last, it's not the last one. One of the last ones I did was in 2022 in Dartmouth University when Antifa showed up and they canceled the event. Basically, I did it alongside Andy Nell, and it was going to be a great event. We expected hundreds of people to attend. We had security. Somebody actually made the point that place was probably the most protected place outside in New Hampshire, besides the governor's mansion. It was going to be awesome. Antifa showed up. They threatened violence, and all of a sudden they were just like, "We had to do it online." It sucked,
So,
but
how do you have a conversation with those people when
it
they've
it,
stopped
it, it can be very difficult. And again, I go to somebody who I very much look up to. His name is Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis. I mean, Daryl Davis is a black man. And he would go in the 90s to speak with members of the KKK. Now, these people, I don't want to, that's his story to say, but like the gist of it, he made friends with one of them because of jazz. He liked jazz, this KKK member, and Daryl Davis was a jazz player, so he played, and they started talking, and all of a sudden he started just asking questions and making sure that he talked to these people. He talked to I forget, like the Grand Wizard of the KKK, the local or whomever. They became friends, and he was still racist, but they became friends, and all of a sudden they started he started attending these KKK rallies as a black man, and he got over 100 people to renounce the robes. Now, not everybody can do this, I will say, and it will be very, very difficult for people to go into the KKK, or for me, somebody who is like, former Antifa. Like, if I go into like an Antifa rally, it's not going to go well for me. It definitely isn't. I am not advocating for people to go over and talk to Antifa, or for members to talk to, or for black people, or like, people of color to go over talk to the KKK, or even non-racist people to go talk to the KKK. That is not what I am advocating for. But what I am advocating for is that we not treat the other side as if they were all members of Antifa, or if all the other side as if they were members of the KKK. And that's where the problem really lies, because we continue to treat, well, not we, but like a lot of people on the right, they see people who voted for Joe Biden, they see people who are liberals or progressives, and they say you're just an Antifa, like like all these different things, and you see it online, like all of these different gross insults on both sides of the aisle. And that's where really the conversation, that's the key target that I'm trying to change. I'm trying to get people to talk to people who are progressive, well, with liberals, Democrats, because the vast majority of Americans really do agree with certain foundational values. They're pro free speech, they're pro America, they want to see America thrive. But unfortunately, you get the air sucked out of the room by Antifa, by right wing groups like the Proud Boys, or there's a few others. They just want to hear themselves talk instead of trying to understand and listen to the other side.
So, uh, having said that, I completely agree with what you just said, because as a black person, I predominantly lived for the last 47 years of my life in a white environment. Okay, so I've had to deal with I've had to deal with all of those things. On the other hand, the majority of the people that I know and come to know in this situation that I've lived in for 47 years in the Pacific Northwest are exactly that. They're just Americans trying to get through the day. They love their country. They want their country. And there's been so many instances in my life when I've had white people say to me, wow, I never thought that way, And so you break down that whole stupid thing that's, for the most part, imposed upon them. I don't know a baby that has ever been born racist. So when you can start talking and breaking down the dialogue that they was raised up on, then there's an opportunity. And I've experienced that many, many, many times. Where my difficulty is in the Black community. I have a difficulty in the Black community because I'm supposed to act a certain way, be a certain way in order to be Black. And I wrote a book called Uncoloring Race, and I could have easily called it Uncoloring Stupid because I just don't fit that mold. I believe that we are people, and the most spectacular thing on this planet, in my opinion, are people. And so I'm not afraid to reach in, reach out, touch back, do whatever I have to do to just be a person next to another person. So I get it. As far as being radical and being crazy and all this, so burn down your city and snap your finger when the powers that control the conversation snap their finger and you burn down your neighborhood, something's wrong. There's something wrong there. So one of the reasons that I was attracted to you is because you kind of grew up in certain respect because you did. You grew up. You weren't 17. You weren't 9. You're now 30. You got a kid. All of those things. What I find with people is that the older we get, the less crazy we are about things. Our passion seems to kind of die down, and we just want to get through the rest of it because we're not trying to find ourselves. We're not trying to figure it all out. We've done all that. So that's kind of where I'm at today. When it comes to the race issue, I've never been a victim. I don't know what a minority is because I'm not. I'm an American citizen. So for me, I live with that mindset every day, which helps me to just be a good neighbor.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the big talking points that I hear from a lot of conservatives, and I think to an extent it's accurate, is when they will ask someone who's Black, someone who's brown like myself, they will say, well, what actual like racism have you actually experienced in your life? And a lot of people will actually tell you, no, I don't have any racist experiences. Like they start thinking like, like I really don't. If you continually think about race, you'll start seeing it everywhere. But if you just kind of think about it like, well, really, who has been prejudiced against me? And that really doesn't occur as often as as a lot of these race obsessed activists will claim that it is. I will tell you though, I'll give you an example of somebody who was prejudiced against me, and I think it's actually kind of funny. My parents' home, right next to it, there was an open house. And they were just curious, they have their home, so they were just curious. So we went in there. It was an open house, so we opened the door, we come in, and then there's this lady, presumably the realtor, and she sees us, and she's like, "Oh, hey, how are you? Are you here to like help us mow the lawn?" And I was like, "What the hell?" I thought about it, and I was like, "Wow, like that's kind of racist," but it's what they would call a quote unquote microaggression. And now, if I was a college activist, I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that to me. Like this is a white oppression, all these things." And I'd just be like, "Oh, what an ignorant comment," and then it made me laugh. And it's just like, okay, whatever. Just move on with it.
I'll share a funny story with you. I'm in the plumbing trade, and I was doing a job at a customer's house, and somehow the conversation went to back when we were kids. And I said, well, I was not a very good kid. I used to steal people's cars and do all kinds of bad things. And then he says, well, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you had to do that. That's the only way you could put food on the table, right? And the whole conversation went to him seeing that I had to do these things because I was disadvantaged and I didn't have the same opportunities. At the end of the conversation, I said, sir, can I explain something to you? And he said, sure. because now, I'm this guy who has an audience with him because I'm impoverished and I'm poor. And I said, I stole those people's cars because I didn't give a damn about them. I didn't think about anything or any damage that I was doing. I didn't realize what I was doing. I didn't care. I was a badass kid. That's what I told him. And he goes, oh, and didn't know where to go with that. So I understand what you just said. Okay.
No, and there's a lot of different theories of crime, and there one of them is the needs theory. Basically, you commit crime because you need to put food on the table, and that is accurate. There's people out there who feel like they need to put food on the table, so they go rob groceries, and they go do all these things. AOC always talks about like some like woman who goes into a grocery store to try to steal bread, to try to steal milk, to feed her children eggs or whatever. But when you actually look down a bit, and while that exists, a lot of times it's because, like, as you mentioned, people don't care. Like, some people really don't care. They see a profit, they see something, a system that they could exploit. They see that they can get away with it, so they commit crimes. There's many different theories for the reason people commit crimes. I think that the need-based reason is actually not as prevalent in America at this point as it might be. And I don't know, I'm just kind of like thinking. I would venture that during the Great Depression, you probably had a lot more crime that was need-based, but it's not. It's that type of sociological theory is not always like the prominent one. There's always different reasons why people will commit crimes. One of them is the lack of respect for institutions. That's another theory. When you have no respect for for your neighbors, for your friends, or for authority figures, you don't care. What the hell? I'm going to steal that car, as you mentioned. I'm going to do these things. I do not care. And I think that conversation has to be had, because you can't just continue to put the blame on society. You have to start looking at why do people do it, and some people just don't care, so they will commit a crime. They will steal those cars.
I would even be more, really more simple. I'll simplify it even more than you have. There are bad people in the world. Period. There are bad people in the world who could give less than a damn about anything or anyone, and we need to acknowledge that, because I don't want to make excuses for somebody who's going to stick a gun in a woman's face and steal her purse. I don't want to make an excuse for that person. So there are bad people in the world, and period. There are good people in the world. Unfortunately, they outnumber the bad people. Otherwise, we would have carnage and chaos on a daily basis. So realistically, we have to kind of realize that there are people in the world that will knock a little old lady down and take her purse, or break in your house and steal your stuff, because they don't give a damn. And the problem I have with that is the accountability and personal responsibility means nothing to them. Therefore, they have to pay a price for that, in my opinion.
One of the crazy things.
Opinion, not just fact to me.
No. When I was younger and I was growing up, I used to think that nobody was a bad person. In fact, there was a book, How to Make Friends and Influence People, which I absolutely book, 100 years old, and it's actually so old that when it's talking, there's a page that talks about the German army, how admirable it is, and I'm like, wow, this is pre-World War II.
I've read the book, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So anyways, I remember specifically one of the things it talked about, like, I can't remember if it was Al Capone or if it was Billy the Kid, one of those like gunmen from or whatever. And it made the argument that those people don't see themselves as bad people. They just see themselves as justified, and they will see themselves as being justified in their actions. Everybody sees themselves as justified. There's a truth to that. There's some truth to that. But as I've gotten older, I actually do not agree with the idea that that there are no bad people. I do think that there are bad people, and they're called narcissists. I think that there is far too many narcissists out there, and we don't even notice. And I think the proof is in the pudding, because if you look at this, there's only about 1% of the whole population, 1 in 100, I believe it is, that are people who are narcissists. And well, the people in prison, I had to look it up real quick. Well, typically there's about 20% of like all people who are in prison right now, and inmates, like they're narcissists and they're in prison, like they're well overrepresented in the prison population. And there's a lot of narcissists who get a lot of, they get away with it because they know how to gain the system, and they do not have empathy for another person. And that is a big thing for me, somebody who has no empathy for another one, especially when we're talking about crime. Right now, one of the things that we've been seeing in New York, there is a game where there's people who are literally punching women, like just in the face and running away. That is just somebody who, like, I bet you anything that they're narcissists. They don't care. They have no respect for another human being.
Well, I mean, that's true. I mean, your wife is walking down the street and in Virginia, and some guy walks up while she's pushing your kid, and he knocks your. We had a lady who was a tourist, as an example, with a child. She came out of her hotel, and some guy walked up to her and hit her in the face with a brick for no reason at all. So I get that, okay, and I don't want to go down too far
Sure.
that kind of thing. We have a lot of lack of civility seems to be growing in our nation, and I think it's just like anything else. There are people who think, and I'm talking about Mexico or any southern in the southern hemisphere, who think, hey, I have a right to cross that border in America, and I'm justified. Would you call those narcissists?
No, I don't think that I'd call him a narcissist. I will say, though, I think that there's two types of crimes. And this is like from law school, this is like a basic of foundation. There's two types of crimes. There's those that are called malum in se, which is Latin for evil or bad in itself, evil in itself. And there's malum prohibitum, which is made evil by legislation or made bad by legislation. They're Latin terms. When you look at the terms of that, if you look at the border crossings, for example, and somebody who is crossing the border, are they committing a crime? Yes, they are. But those aren't and there's reasons for having these types of laws on the books. But when somebody comes into that, I don't see them as like evil or like as narcissists. They typically come in because they're trying to, become, not all of them, but they come in because they're trying to feed their families. They're trying to get a job, make their lives better. That's the majority of them. Now, that doesn't mean that we should just have no laws and we shouldn't have a system in place, but it does put things into context. The people largely who are coming into the border, through the border illegally, are not bad people. We do need a system to screen them, though, because people who come in, we can filter those people, those narcissists, those people who have a criminal record, those people who don't deserve, who threaten the safety of every other American. We need to have a system in order to screen them out. But I don't think the majority of the immigrants who are coming here are bad in themselves.
So
or they're not maladministrated.
I'm going to play devil's advocate with you, okay? You got a home, right?
I do.
You got a baby, right?
I do.
You got a wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody walks to the front door and sits down on your couch and says, I need to feed my kids, and I'm going to hang out in your house for a while, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what a lot of us feel like when we don't have a border, that somebody's just walking through my front door, plopping themselves down in my living room, and now I got to take care of them until they are able to stand on their feet.
Yeah, and of course.
I think that's, it's like a country that doesn't have a border doesn't have a country.
No, and I definitely hear that argument. And like I said, I am not arguing for like open borders. I'm definitely not. We need a system to screen people in.
And you mentioned that.
Yeah,
and what I'm saying to you is, I've been an American citizen my whole life. And I sit here and I say, well, this is no different than somebody coming into my home, into my front door, regardless of my kids, regardless of my bills, regardless of everything that I have to deal with. And now I got to pay for them too. And, that's kind of how a lot of us feel, a lot of Americans. We can't do the same thing in Mexico. We can't do the same thing in China. We can't do the same thing anywhere on the planet, to the best of my knowledge. So I know that's not what you're saying. I understand that, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But that's what's happening. And when you open up your prisons and say, here, we're going to put you all over in New York City, we're going to fly you in. I mean, that becomes an outrage.
No, definitely. And I mean, no, of course, no. And I mean, sometimes I read about some of these things, and I was reading about like how New York is giving debit cards to a lot of immigrants. I'm like, well, you're incentivizing people to come over here illegally. Like when you start offering things for them. I mean, when you have I will say this: when you have incentives for people to come here, I think that people are going to want to come here illegally. But you also have to make sure that people who are have no criminal record, people who just want to come in and work, and they don't take anything from the system. Like New York's literally giving benefits, or California, for example, is giving insurance to illegal immigrants in Medicare to illegal immigrants. I believe it's Medicare, or like some sort of health system. When you have those incentives, then you're going to have more illegal immigration. Now, if you make it very clear to illegal immigrants that if you're here and you're not paying taxes or you don't have a right to work, then you don't have any benefits from it. You don't. I think there was a Supreme Court case, I believe, in Texas specifically, that said that Texas had to provide free public education to illegal immigrants. That's itself an incentive in the system as well. When you have a lot of these incentives and you make it really difficult for people to come here illegally, then you are going to have more illegal immigration. It's all a game of incentives, really. If you want to fix the border issue, you have to do two things. One, you have to eliminate the incentives of illegal immigration. No Medicare, no debit cards, no some of these like public benefits, none of that. But then you also have to make it easier rather, not easy, easier for people to come. Because I'll tell you that the quote unquote line to come to America from actually varies from countries. I believe that it's a 20 plus year waiting line if you're a Mexican trying to come to America the legal way. Well, you look at it and you're like, okay, it's 20 years, or I could hop the border, like you could do that.
I agree with you 100% on that. But see, the problem with Americans, we the people, have relegated whatever happens in our country to the government. So the government is saying it's going to take 20 years for you to come into this country. Okay, when the government is controlling everything, then everything is in chaos, in my opinion. It's just that simple. The people were the loudest voice in this country. It's one of the reasons that everybody wants to come here, because of the freedom that the nation offered. But right now, I think we're losing all that. I don't really understand what kind of representation we have in our government. And that's another conversation and another show. But I understand, I agree with you. Eliminate the incentives, period. Enough said. Now, we got about 15, 12, 13 minutes left. I want to know, well, two things. What's different about you now?
Different how? Because I mean, I feel like there's different things all
Well,
over the place.
you're not a 12-year-old kid. You're not a 9-year-old kid. You're not chasing after Antifa. You're alienated from Antifa. So how are you different in the way that you see the world that you live in?
I've grown a lot more patient. I feel like I've always had patience for certain things. I feel like I've always been really patient with like children and stuff, which is honestly wonderful when it comes to raising my son. I can hear him cry for a long time, and like he's crying, like he's hungry or whatever, and I'm not really bothered by that. But on a general note, um, I think that I've grown a lot more patient of like in politics, and I understand that like just there's so many people who are trying to do good things, and many people who just are just mistaken, and I feel like that's really helped me to really slow down my passion for wanting to do something about it, like with my own hands, if I believe, because I do believe in the system, that there is a usable system that people can actually make a difference. It just takes a really long time to do anything. you know um it sucks, and it really sucks because there's a lot of issues that need to be solved, and but they just don't get done. And that impatience made me join radical groups. The fact that like I was trying my best and it wasn't working, so like I want to level up my next thing. Now it doesn't mean that I'm not trying my best anymore, but at the very least, like I'm like, okay, that bill didn't get passed, what are you going to do? You try again next time.
Well, I mean, I think that's all true. I think, in particular, when we start raising a family, uh, a lot of things change, and as you will experience, through the life of your child and your marriage, um, sometimes you just can't grab the bull by the ring and by the horns. You have to kind of take a little bit at a time because there are more important things now. And that's, I think that happens to a lot of us. When I see a 70-year-old man out here saying, protesting whatever, I sit here and go, wow, did you ever get it? Did you ever get anything worthwhile in your life? With kind of like the last few minutes that we have, our America. What's the motivation behind that? Tell us about that.
Sure. So Our America is an organization that seeks to unite Americans under common values and advocate for these issues, not as Republicans and not as Democrats, but as Americans are fighting for our America. Some of the issues we're advocating for are fundamental to what it means to be an American. We're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right, the idea that we need safer streets and brighter futures. We want to make sure that the police is well funded to make sure the streets are safe. We want to make sure that the government stays away from the economy as much as possible to stop inflation, as well as making sure that people who want to can have trust in their voting institutions. That means voter ID. Some of these issues that are really safeguarding the American dream. They're safeguarding the fair elections. They're safeguarding just the ability to be able to live in your community safely. And I mean, we've been active right now for a couple of years now. We're active in Arizona, we're active in Georgia, and we're about to launch a new program, which I can't really say about it, which is really going to be targeting specific areas that we feel that the conservative and the libertarian movement and really have failed to reach because they just don't go into certain communities. And right now, I think the last thing we did was last year, a big thing rather, we went over to the city council armed with about 45-ish people and demanded action on police funding, or just to raise awareness, or rather about police funding and about the crime issue in Tucson. And actually, this is the kicker, which I thought was really cool, just to show you kind of what kind of a difference we're really making. We went after the city council event, my field representative and myself, we wrote an op-ed to the local paper, and the NAACP responded. Now, they were saying bad things about us. They were saying we're wrong, but it just should give you a little bit of the impact we're having, that you have some of these established organizations that they're very well funded and they're doing a lot of work, that they felt the need to say, no, you guys are doing the wrong thing. I feel like that's really powerful, because we're definitely we're barking at the right tree.
Well, I don't think too much of the NAACP on any level, so I don't have any kind words to say about them. But I do believe when people stop talking, then division, I believe division destroys just about everything, whether it be your marriage, your relationship with your kids, your relationship in your community. I think that division is a destructive thing when you have nothing to say to one another. So I agree with you. When it comes to the NAACP, I know the history of it. I know how it was funded, how it started. It was a very good cause when it started. Everything seems to go sideways or it seems to go nuts. That's why you left Antifa. Things get really kind of stupid and you lose the motivation because everybody wants to be in front of a camera and everybody wants to be their own soapbox. And the bottom line is we still got people that are starving. We still got chaos in the streets. And I just think, if the NAACP was worth anything to me, it would have made a bigger difference a long time ago, as opposed to, being the harbingers of the I call it the plantation nation. So I'm not in that lane. I think when a person has to live their life as a victim, then they're robbed really the fundamental values of the American dream. And I'm not a victim. So I think those types of organizations thrive on victims, and I'm not one of those people. That's my 2 cents on that. You have the last word. We got about 6 minutes left, and I kind of want to hear from your heart. You're 30 years old now. You're 20 years down the road from when you came here. Give me Gabriel the way Gabriel is today.
I mean, it's funny. You can definitely say I've changed, and I definitely have changed in many, many ways. But I can tell you this, that a lot of the same foundation, like the foundation to who I am as a person, I feel like are very much the same. Number one, I still want to help people, whether it be somebody who is out on the street or somebody who, or, try to help a community with crime, with free speech rights, or some of these issues. I want to help that community. Number two, I don't trust the government. I never have, and I don't think I ever will. I think that when the government gets involved, it just does more harm than good. I feel like I trust my neighbors, I trust my common Americans that we can do this ourselves without government intervention. And who I am as a person, I just as I mentioned at the start of this, I'm a dad. I care about my son, and I want to make sure that I make America a better place than it was for me. And let me tell you, America has been awesome to me, and I feel like it could be better.
But we agree there. I agree with you 100%. I believe in our Constitution. I think it's a miraculous document, and I think so. For me, it took 87 years for the nation as a whole to kick slavery out of the communities of this country, and we fought a political dynasty to do that. And I agree with you 100%. I don't trust the government farther than I can spit. I just don't. They seem to mess everything up all the time, and I don't think we have the kind of representation that was the fundamental principles of this country when it got started. I mean, they fought in order to have freedom. And I believe that fight's probably brewing all over again, perhaps. I don't know. I'm hoping that something, I'm hoping we turn the corner and get back to civility, personal responsibility, and accountability. I'm hoping that those things happen. I am really, really, really grateful that you came on board today. I read your book. There's a couple of things in there that I vehemently disagree with. However, I think that's okay. And I'm glad you're a citizen. I'm glad you're a father. I'm glad all of these things that are opening up for you in the newness of being a father, you get to experience that too, because life is just precious. And I'm 100% with you when it says, I want to help people. I think the key to having a good life is to serve others. So you and I are in the same lane there. Gabriel Nadales, I really appreciate you coming on board. Take very good care of your kid, your wife, your marriage. And I'll be tracking with you to see what goes on, because I don't think you're done yet.
I'm definitely not done.
You're not done yet. Okay.
I'm going to be an activist my whole life.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk about all that with us. And you're welcome back anytime. I hope this has been as much fun for you as it has for me.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it very much.
All right. Well, you can have a nice evening. I'll tell my engineer to go ahead and tune us out and play my wife's commercial, and we will be seeing you. Do you have any other books on the horizon or anything like that going on?
I do. We're still live. So I don't want to give it out yet. I can tell you a little bit after, once we're doing a little bit more on that.
Well, I'll be tracking you. I'll be tracking with you, okay? You have a friend over here, and let's talk about it.
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.